Hello, everybody. This is the CT Sports Talent Show. My name is Christopher Saunders, and I'm pleased to have on a former New London native who spends his time a little bit in Connecticut, not as much now, obviously, because he's at Boston University. Jason Pellum is with me. Jason, I appreciate you coming on, buddy.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
And before I go any further, I also want to mention that he's director of basketball operations as well for Boston as well, which is part of the Patriot League. Jason, I kind of want to talk about with you before we get into obviously the program that you're with right now. Just kind of, we were talking about New London, and again, my conversations that I've had with so many players and coaches from the ECC, and more so just in that area, people kind of forget that there's a whole lot of not just talented players from all sports that play in that area, but there's so much tradition when it comes to. We were just talking about New London with Coach Parker. He recently has retired, moved on. I'm sure he'll still come to games if he wants to, but Coach Cornish has taken over and he's able to do his thing. And I think he was with New London prior to that years ago. Just kind of talk to me about your times with New London, if you can.
Yeah, so my mom is retired Navy, so that's how I ended up in the Northeast. She got stationed over in Groton, originally from Houston, Texas. So
Mm.
moved around a lot as a kid, but ended up settling in Groton. And when I was in the fourth grade, moved over to New London, and realizing early on just like how small of a town it was, but how like I'd say like rich in tradition. I
Mm.
had played football the year before I moved to New London. I played for the military community Dolphins, the sub base program, and played against New London. So I had already had some experience with the kids there. Got banged up a lot, so I knew they were very talented, and they went hard, especially on the football field. But when
Mm.
I got there, just realizing how much tradition there was, how passionate the whole city was about their sports. At the time, football was very, very big.
Mm.
Um, so especially with football games, the Thanksgiving game is always a big tradition. Everybody in the city is pretty much there. It kind of gave like Friday Night Lights vibes, like on the Friday night, but just for that Thanksgiving game, like city kind of shut down. Everybody was there. So um, got a lot of experience, in elementary school and middle school going to those games. Um, Also, when I was in eighth grade, they won the ECC championship, played against NFA. So I watched like Alan Cheney play against RJ Evans. So like that was packed gym, stuff like that. So early on, just getting those experiences. And then obviously I knew I didn't want to go to high school anywhere else. So, being in high school, just being now a part of those experiences, always great. Like my freshman year, Jordan Reed being our quarterback, winning the state championship, like just things like that, it's and then obviously playing basketball, Chris Dunn, All-American, top 5 NBA draft pick. So just being around all of that talent in just that really small, concentrated space. Everybody just takes pride in that, because we kind of like that's like one of our own, and if it's homegrown and we're kind of surrounded by a lot of, I'll call them more affluent communities, and we're not that. So you kind of got to get everything out of the mud, and we kind of have that chip on our shoulder with everything. So being from New London, you kind of, when you branch out, you kind of just take that with you.
Do you think it's fair to say because of, like you mentioned, the communities that you're around, more affluent, a little bit more money, and then obviously New London, there are spots, but again, it's more middle class, maybe a little bit lower. It's tougher, especially nowadays with how expensive everything is. And I don't know what the situation was back then. And by the way, real quick, appreciate your mom's service as well for what she's done. Really appreciate that. Do you feel like that kind of chip was good, but also bad in a way because you put so not so much you, but overall, kids put too much pressure on themselves to try to make up for what is maybe hard at the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And to your point, I think there's good and bad in a lot of things. So yes, to answer your question, um, on the positive side, yes, it always gave us that extra that drive. We were always, it was either go hard or don't come out here. So, but on the other side, there was also um negative perceptions that came with it, off the rip. Kind of like stereotypes, prejudgments, but at the same time also there was that expectation of like we're winning. It's either you win or like, so and that came from everybody, parents, coaches, us as kids. Like we all just wanted to win because there was just there's a rich history of success athletically in New London. So you never want to be that team, that program, whatever, to slow that down.
Mhm.
So, subconsciously, yes, there's that pressure, and it can uh I think it made losing a lot harder in those cases. I wouldn't say it was hard to get through because everybody has adversity, but those losses were a lot harder to deal with just because there was the expectation of winning. There wasn't oh, we're gonna go out here and get better. It's like, nah, we're out here to win, and that's really what it was. So yeah, to answer your question, it was tough at times.
You were telling me how you were a late bloomer and that senior year was the only year that you played.
Right.
And talk to me about just again, obviously playing for Parker, and obviously the program is one thing because there's so much rich tradition as we were talking about with that. But to kind of go in just one year with all the dudes that played before you and obviously played with you at, your senior year, just talk to me about how much fun that was.
Honestly, that was probably the most fun that I've had playing a high school sport. Um, just because one, we were winning. So, winning cures everything. Everybody's happy when you're winning. But at the same time, um, these are guys who I had been in school with since, elementary, so we had grown up together. We had all been through, kid, like micro leagues, rec leagues, and stuff like that. So being able to, honestly, for me, it was cool. I didn't play much, so being able to sit back and just watch how everybody had just like blossomed. Now we're traveling to, go play teams in New York. We're playing the St. Joe's, the Northwest Catholics, the Trinity Catholics. We're going and playing in tournaments in Rhode Island, so it was just like just having those experiences and like being on coach buses and playing at Providence College because that was the year Chris signed. So
Yeah.
just being able to kind of just sit back and enjoy that. I think also watching really, really high level basketball at the same time. Like
Mhm.
at the time, Chris was, depending on who you ask, one or two point guard in the country, right? So I'm seeing that firsthand. I'm practicing, against him every day. So it was like being that I didn't have much basketball experience, it's kind of like a sink or swim thing. Like just being out there, it made me able to just learn, grow as a player. Like I never thought that I would play basketball at all, competitively, but being able to just, like I said, be out there,
Mhm.
it's like sink or swim. So either you get with it and you figure it out, or you're gonna struggle. So and also these are like my friends, these are my brothers. So these are guys who I don't want to let down in any way. So I don't want to be that like weak link. Obviously, I'm not going to play much, but if I'm going to be in practice, like making them work hard, just knowing and understanding that it's bigger than me, and being a part of something like that at that age was fun.
Reading your bio on the Boston University website and seeing how, and I'll get into the next question too, seeing your role with the program that you ended up later walking on to, which was UConn, right? You went on as a practice player and then later walked on, and you were part of some pretty fun things in 2014. We'll get to that in just a second. But it almost seems like you carried what you did your senior year, which I'm sure people, obviously, with all the talent there, noticed you, and that hopefully opened eyes at UConn, allowed you an opportunity there, right? So it sounds like point A moved to point B, and it's like, as I always say, everything happens for a reason, and
Right.
people saw what you did on the court, and they're like, all right, we want this young man to be a part of the positive culture because he's that piece that we need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it didn't necessarily go that way, but that was my mindset behind it. Coming out of, so it's funny, going into college, I
Mm-hmm.
actually went to UConn to be in the drum line. I had been in the drum line all throughout high school. So fun fact about me. Um, so I went to UConn originally to do that. Did that my freshman year,
Mm-hmm.
uh, just because I committed to it, but I quickly realized it just wasn't for me. But while I was doing that, it's a big campus. We have a rec center, so I'm playing in the gym every day with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was still growing at the time. So I graduated high school probably 6 foot. By the time I decided to try out for the men's team, I was around 6'3", and that was 2 years later. So in 2 years, grew maybe 4 inches. And when I got there, I noticed that I started to get better. I was doing things that I'd like never done before, stuff like that. So realized that like as I was growing, my talent was kind of growing with me. And I had a friend who decided to walk on our freshman year, and he was a practice player. Saw he was, practicing every day. And while he was practicing, I'm also playing with him in the rec center. And I'm noticing that like I'm obviously able to keep up with him. So I'm like, hey, if I can, hang on the court with this dude who's practicing with these guys every day, maybe I can do it. So my sophomore year, just decided as like a what the heck. They have an open tryout every spring, or excuse me, every fall. And I decided to just go to the open tryout. So
Mhm.
up making the team. They after you try out, you go straight to practice that day. So went to practice, was able to make it through, the few days of like training camp, if you want to call it, and they gave me a jersey. So I was a practice player for my sophomore year. I say walk on because I was able to travel, and technically, I was on the roster.
Mhm.
Just didn't have a jersey or anything like that. But traveling with the team, again, in practice every day, preseason workouts and stuff like that. So that experience was like completely on a whole nother level, because that's when I realized what college athletics was. Um, so yeah, I would say that just that mindset of like, hey, like if you're here,
Mhm.
sink or swim, either you're gonna figure it out or you're not. That's kind of the same mindset I applied when I got to UConn. It was just on a whole nother level.
So when you got to UConn, was Ollie already there or was Calhoun there?
No, Ollie was there.
Ollie
So
was there. Okay.
my freshman year was Kevin Ollie's first season, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously you weren't there for Calhoun, but I'm sure you knew from just obviously, I mean, it's not very hard to know what kind of guy he is, and obviously the aura around him and the rings and the whole nine. But
Right.
for people who may have forgotten, that 2014 team had Napier, had Boatwright, had a bunch of dudes that were talented, as you know. And to be a part of that team after what UConn did just years prior with, Party and Kemba, the shot made at Madison Square Garden. I mean, that's in my mind just because of the call and all that. That
Right.
2014 year, man, that must have been so much fun for you and the
Yeah.
team, obviously.
That was one of my like so college, I say to this day, best 4 years of my life. But that year, sophomore year, was on another level. It was just like there was just this like aura around everything. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, the season went up and down, but like being on the court every day, just hearing like what I will say is Shabazz Napier led that like he led that team to that national championship. Shout out to everybody in the work they put in. Like
Mm.
without DeAndre Daniels, without Niels Giffey, Mita Brima, Ryan Boatwright, like they don't win that. But Shabazz's leadership is what took it to a whole new level. Like you knew he commanded the court, like when they say you want your point guard to be an extension of your coach, like he was that. If he needed to run a practice, he could, use his voice and do that. But he just knew how to win. And I think obviously being on that 2011 team,
Mhm.
with Kemba, Jeremy Lamb, that definitely just gave him an extra level of experience and confidence. But also him having to grow over the 2 years after, just not having as talented teams,
Yeah.
um, and just kind of trying to find himself. I think the senior year team just kind of put it all together. You had KO, who's like one of the greatest motivational speakers you'll know. He's just like a real straight up dude. Got a lot of love for KO just because he's very he has a lot of quotables. He's a very wise man, I'll say. Um, but him having him at the helm and Shabazz just being a leader on the court, it was crazy. And then like people forget that year. So I got a story. So I don't know if you remember the game against Florida at Gamble when Shabazz hit the buzzer beater.
Mm.
Uh, we had shoot around that morning. Shabazz is just playing around like we're about to end, and he literally does the same exact thing. He's like, oh, like does the fake countdown and does like a runner like shot from the free throw line and runs off the court. So we're like, it's funny. And then obviously, like if you go back and watch the play, that's exactly how it goes down. He shoots a little free throw line jumper, buzzer beater, and sprints off the court. It was like surreal. Like I was like, you can't make this stuff up. So that stuff, like moments like that,
Mm.
just it made sense why we ended up winning it that year. And then obviously the tournament run was crazy. Campus was wild. Like you
Mm.
never experienced stuff like that. And for people who have never been to college or like don't have the blessing of going through something like that, like I feel for them just because like
Mhm.
an atmosphere like that, you can't explain it. You just got to be there.
Do you think there's some, because the way that you're, and I know you weren't around the team the previous year, obviously the past basketball season of which UConn won with Klingon and Sonogo and all those guys. Obviously, that team was just unworldly, godly good for many reasons: height, speed, depth, shooting, defense. Yeah, I could go on and on and on. Is there any traits? And I know the game of basketball is different. I know the players are different from the 2014 team to the 2023 team. So I get that. But are there any traits that you saw from either people you talked to or games that you watched from the 23 team and the 14 team? Is there anything similar?
I would say no, just because they're two completely different teams in their respects, like both very talented. I just think that it went down to the coaching. I think KO, with his experience with the NBA and everything, he had a pro mindset to how he ran things,
Mhm.
where Dan Hurley's very much a X's and O's guy. Like, if you watch UConn sets, it's like, oh my, how can you guard that? You know what I mean? Like, so much action and cutting and screening, and it's like,
Yeah.
and then you look up and you wonder why you got blown out by 25. But it's like, and then you add on the knockdown shooting, high percentage shooting on top of that. It's like, it's just a recipe for success. Where I would say the 2014 team was more of a, everyone had their role and complemented each other very well, whereas this team was just very dynamic. They had a lot of, you could score from a lot of places,
Mhm.
inside, outside, whereas you knew what you were getting with the 14 team. It just worked, like you knew Boat was going to give you, your 15 points, but he's going to go crazy on defense. Shabazz is going to control the game. DeAndre Daniels is going to, go off for his 17 to 20. Niels is going to play defense and knock down 3-point shots.
Mhm.
You have Amit Ibrahima as your rim protector, so it's like everything just fit perfectly. It was more like perfect puzzle pieces. Whereas
Mhm.
this last team, this 2023 team, they were just weapons on top of weapons on top. And then to match that, they had the X's and O's to go with it. Whereas the 14 team wasn't so much X's and O's as
Mhm.
it was just grinded out, you know, good basketball, share the ball, just play together, play hard. This team was just kind of that, but
Mhm.
everything else in terms of like what you think when you think of high level basketball, with, the cutting action and sharing the basketball and defensive schemes and things like that.
That's great analysis by you. And that's why I ask you the questions and people who were a part of it, because you guys can really, because I thought, whoa, there's some, maybe, some similarities. I thought, nope, completely different, but both obviously great
But
teams
again,
for
that's
good reasons.
that's just my opinion though,
I'm sure
so
you're not the only one. I'm sure there's many more. And I'm sure the 14 team would think that maybe they could win some games against the 23 team and then vice versa. But I digress. Jason, it's been awesome to be able to have you. And I know we're running out of time really quick. I want to talk about what led you to the coaching side and obviously Boston University.
yeah. So I knew coming out of college that I wanted to be involved with basketball some way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
Um, didn't really know how that worked though, because the basketball industry isn't just like, they don't say, hey, like, do you want to be a coach? Unless you're a former player, that doesn't usually happen for you. So I had to get creative and figure out how I wanted to do that.
Mhm.
But I really just started from the ground up, networking. I worked camps after I graduated college. So yeah, I was working like youth, kids camps, UConn, Syracuse, stuff like that, just trying to figure out, how to do this. Um, it took some time, and then also I got very uncomfortable, which I give that piece of advice to anybody who does want to get into coaching.
Mhm.
Um, get uncomfortable, put yourself out there, because that's the only way people will know that it's something you want to do. Again, like I said, nobody's going to come up and ask you if you want to do it. Um, so yeah, I did that. And I was blessed to keep a relationship. So my senior year, I actually was with the women's team. I switched over and practiced with our women's team at UConn. So kept a good relationship with she's now the head coach at Wisconsin, Marissa Mosley. So kept in contact with her for the few years after I graduated, and she actually randomly emailed me. I kept in touch with her probably like 2-3 times a year, just random emails. And she emailed me back in 2019 in the summer and was like, hey, like, are you still interested in coaching? I'm like, absolutely. She was like, oh, well, I might have a job opening up here at BU. Long story short, the job didn't open up, but she said, hey, to get you ready, I can get you an internship back at UConn. So I went back to UConn and interned as video coordinator,
Mhm.
just to see what what the industry was like and get my foot in the door there. So interned at UConn in 2019 under Ben Cantor. Shout out my guy. He's now assistant coach at UConn. Um, and just took that experience. After that season ended, that is when COVID hit. So
Mhm.
put everything on hold. And if you remember, the following college basketball season, they shortened it. And it was only about 2 months or 3 months from January to March. So put the position went on wash at BU. So after that happened, it's now 2020 summertime, and she gets a job at Wisconsin. So that falls off the bed at BU just because obviously she was my plug-in.
Mhm.
Um, but I just kind of trolled the internet. I stayed on the BU website, and when I found out that who's now the head coach, Melissa Graves, got hired, reached out to her, got in touch with her, and just gave her the story about what happened. She talked to Marissa Mosley. She gave the blessing and got in the door back in 2021 as video coordinator at BU. So started off there and going into year 3.
That's awesome, dude. It's great to be able to hear Connecticut guys and young women as well to be able to have opportunities at the next level, wherever it ends up being, and being able to continue doing what they're doing. Obviously, the coaching inside you was there all along, going back to your days in New London, your senior year, and, the role, and then being a part of UConn, and then being a part of the women's team and trying to help them out with. Obviously, I don't need to go into what they've done. Gino goes without
Yeah,
saying.
that's
Don't
we
need
can
to
talk
have to
about
go into
that.
that.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jason, it's awesome to be able to have you. Best of luck this upcoming season with Boston University, and keep doing what you're doing, man. You're making Connecticut proud.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
Always. I'll wrap things up here in the CT Sports Talent Show. So, next time, stay safe. Remember, CT stands for Connecticut Talent. I'm Majority Find them all. Do the rest of it, everybody, and be well.